currency. Now, looking at Thailand compared to Greece as well as compared to the European Union, does Thailand have enough buffers to sustain this damage from the Eurozone crisis, as well as what are the lessons that the ASEAN region can learn from this crisis?
Well, maybe if I could start that, when we faced this situation back in 2008, 2009, I think we're probably going to see the similar shocks that go through. First, the impact that will continue to affect the economy first will be the financial system. Mm-hmm. The financial system we've already seen where whenever there's more and more talk about Brexit, Greece leaving the euro, and the contagion will spread to Spain and so on and so forth, people will reduce risk. So right now it seems like the US dollar, even though with all its imperfection, seems to be the safest bet. Mm-hmm. So they go to US treasuries and so on and so forth. So they reduce risk assets, investments in Thai stocks, emerging market stocks, hold to cash, hold on to the US dollar first. And that means that there could be a liquidity issue. I would probably suggest that our authorities prepare in the event that liquidity is abruptly withdrawn from the financial markets. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't impact us as much as we saw back in 2008, 2009 when Lehman Brothers collapsed, that the confidence within the financial markets just went south. The next issue is, of course, our engine of growth is geared towards exports. Now, even though on statistic basis, it seems that Thailand exports to the EU about maybe 10 to 11%, which is on par or slightly lower than what we ship to Japan and to the US. But the issue is that our export is increasing to China. But what the Chinese import from us, they don't use all of it. Mm-hmm. They use it as raw materials as part of the supply chain, which they produce, and then they ship it to the EU. China exports about 14% of its basket to the EU. So therefore, what will happen to us is very similar to what's probably going to happen in 2008, 2009, when these large markets start to tighten down on their consumption. This will translate into lower orders from our export sector, and therefore it will have implications on the revenues that we get. Mm-hmm. And with lower revenues, that means lower consumption. So we need to think about restructuring our economy to reduce its dependency towards the external sector as the engine of growth. We might have to increase our educational system so that people are not just focusing on quantity, but on quality of their income. That is a big bridge which we need to try to close, that we continue to rely too heavily on exports and base our economy on a volume economy rather than a quality economy.
Yes. So, Thanong, does that worry you a bit that the government is spending a lot while we should be preparing financial buffers for the Eurozone?
I think Europe is a ticking time bomb because as a whole, the region accounts for the, largest share of the global GDP, followed by the United States. So if something were to go wrong with those two regions which are closely interrelated, interconnected, and that will definitely affect it, and not only Thailand but also the emerging markets economy as a whole. Right now we see the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa coming along, but I don't think their GDP will have that kind of consumption capability to absorb any surplus, export surplus, from other emerging countries. So it's going to be a very difficult time. It depends on our assumption whether we see that going ahead the global economy will continue to muddle through, or we see that there might be a time that it might have to stop and reset. And if the reset were to happen, I think that will be quite a big mess, and that's something that I think the authorities, the policymakers, will have to take into account, how to protect the country's wealth, because our wealth is largely now in our international reserves, which are heavily denominated in the US dollar, some in euro and in Japanese yen. I think right now we should think about diversifying into other hard assets, into like gold, or into maybe have a certain agreement with China. I think we should have more renminbi, in our international reserves, or or currencies that of a trading partner, stronger economies, instead of relying on the traditional powers.
Yes. Does Ajahn Charit,
Well,
do you have anything?
a few comments, I think, on what happens, what can we do if export goes down a little bit. I think for Thailand itself, there's plenty of room to expand in other ways. We export perhaps too much already and using up resources. So, but that is, and I think a growing opinion that we are too open, too dependent on trade. Too much export, too much import, at the expense, I think, of investment. And we need investment, particularly in infrastructure. Terrible rail system, which doesn't carry anything, which is useless for carrying anything. Nobody uses. We need better universities. We need more money for research, all sorts of things. So even if export falls down a little bit, because it's not going to collapse, we can spend more, make up by spending on these other things, which will be, in the end, more useful. Because if you have better universities, you have better qualified people who can work more, become more productive. If we have better roads, better railways, we can reduce the cost of logistics and we become more competitive. So I think for the Thai economy as such, we have many options. But of course, we have to make sure that the money that we still have in papers of different kinds shuffled, so that we don't lose in this process. So.
Yes. So what about the lessons that ASEAN can learn from this EU crisis?
I would say perhaps we don't need to think about common currency for ASEAN at the moment.
I think one key issue where could be the major flaw of the European Union was that there is an issue of resource mobility. When we continue on with the ASEAN Economic Union, ASEAN Economic Community, we need to be very mindful about the mobility of resources across borders. If these resources are not readily available within one another country, I think that there could be imbalances imposed within the project. I think that there should be better coordination between the monetary authorities as also the fiscal authorities, because what we have right now on paper is largely reduction of trade barriers. But then there are certain social issues also that going into this ASEAN economic community, will it create social unrest as well, or social problems as well, that there might be people from Myanmar that come live into Thailand illegally, and so on and so forth, and they might undercut the labor markets in Thailand on the unskilled side, and so on and so forth, where we've already seen right now, by going towards a formal agreement that there could be more dissemination or disintermediation of unskilled labor, and that could create social issues.
So just looking beyond the economic dimension.
Yeah, there has to be, we can't just talk about economics where everybody uses a common market and everything is just a happy ending. There are certain cultural issues that we need to deal with, we have to consider in order to make the transition towards a larger market more smooth, rather than we should take what's happening in the crisis in the EU as a lesson of maybe what to do and what not to do.
Yes. Well, Ajahn Charit, Kun Kopsith, and Kun Thanong, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.